Hello, and welcome back to the Unnatural Selection Podcast. My name is Abby, and I will be your host for the day. I am a senior biology student at Northern Arizona University, and I'm very interested in this world of genetics and the advancements that are being made. Today, I will be focusing on artificial selection and its effects on the disability community. This topic, I think, is very important as we have made so much progress to already destigmatize disabilities. So, could this new technology lead to further discrimination of those with disabilities? So, in this episode, I am joined by John Schaefer, who is a disability studies professor here at NAU. We had our interview on October 13th in the Institute for Human Development. Before we get started, I do think it is important to mention that neither John or I have a disability, so we are having this conversation without that direct perspective. Yeah, and with that, let's get into it. So today I'm joined by John Schaefer. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm John Schaefer. I'm an academic program coordinator here at NAU in the disability. I oversee our minor in disability studies program. I also teach our intro class and our senior seminar. It was by accident that I got into the disability community. I had moved to Flagstaff. I had a bachelor's degree in political science, but really had no direction in my life. Moved to Flagstaff just kind of to go to a new place, and I was working at a gas station. I needed a job, and someone told me that one of the customers that they worked at a group home with adults with developmental disabilities, and that I should apply. And so I did, and I got the job. I worked in a residential facility where I was the weekend staff. I stayed overnight Friday and Saturday night, and I did that for 15 years. And in that experience, I got to meet and hang out with lots of different people with disabilities with a variety of different needs, different backgrounds, and so that was really my introduction to the field.
Wow. Yeah, I can definitely see it's been like a progression through a lot of different positions and experiences to like where you are today. How do you feel like maybe, I don't know, like society's views or just like, I don't know, things in general have changed over that course of time, like surrounding individuals with disabilities?
Changes happen remarkably. There's been a lot of change for sure. I think the generation of college students now, the Gen Zers, are just more open to people who think different or have different abilities or just differences in general. I think the generation is just more open-minded and accepting of diversity. And that has definitely impacted the disability community. For a long time, people thought about disability as people that use wheelchairs or maybe somebody who is blind. But there's been over the last 15, 20 years a huge realization of neurodiversity, and then also how mental health issues and conditions can be disabling. And so that this awareness around pretty much those two, particularly what we call invisible or non-apparent disabilities, has really changed a lot. And so now we see people are comfortable talking about their diagnoses, just in general, and then also within my students talk about having mental health issues or being neurodivergent, being autistic, and having some struggles with this part of their lives or this part of their academic career because their autism's causing some challenges here and there, and people are just more open to it. And so it's not kind of as much as we call those non-apparent disabilities, but people are choosing not to hide them, and that's been an enormous change.
I guess in our class, we discussed like some of the ethics around disabilities in a healthcare setting. And one big sort of point that was made is that we shouldn't be the ones determining someone's like quality of life. That's like up to the individual with the disability. So I guess like maybe I think that is a big concern with why someone would want to, I don't know, select for an embryo without a disability. Is that concern for like their quality of life? So like, I don't know, I guess what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a great question. This is our topic tomorrow in our seminar class, exactly this topic. And so if I can back up a little bit, there's been a history of eradicating people with disabilities. Kind of in the early 20th century, there was a movement called the eugenics movement, and it was really a philosophy that borrowed on the teachings of Darwin on the survival of the fittest, and that the eugenists believed that there were good genes and bad genes, and that what we try to do for the goal of humanity is to get rid of all the bad genes and only have the good genes. And so obviously you can imagine a lot of people with disabilities were the people that were considered to have the bad genes. Now there are racial overtones to this as well. I didn't say undertones, overtones. There was a lot of other issues, but for people with disabilities specifically, they were front and center in this eugenics movement. We don't want to have more people with disabilities and spread more bad genes into our gene pool. And so it really became an issue. They actually started to do forced sterilization in this country, where if you were somebody with an intellectual disability, and a lot of times young women, they would sterilize them against their will, and just to prevent them from being able to reproduce. It was actually upheld by the Supreme Court in a very famous court case, Buck versus Bell. It's never been formally overturned, although most states have prohibitions against this now. And so there's this long, long history of this eugenics movement of getting rid of bad genes. A lot of people don't realize that in Nazi Germany, before they started going after other ethnic groups, they were going after people with disabilities. They were the first ones that they were put into institutions, brutalized, tested on, killed, and so it's scary to people with disabilities to fast forward to today, where people are talking about good genes and bad genes again, and eradicating the bad genes.
After learning about some of the history and societal shifts that have been made around disabilities, it was time to dive into some bioethical discussions, specifically thinking about those principles of bioethics, which are non-maleficence, beneficence, autonomy, and justice. I really wanted to focus on the beneficence aspect. I don't know, could this technology be considered ethical under the principle of beneficence? If someone were to have a more complicated disability, would, I don't know, this artificial selection, could it be seen as beneficence if you're trying to avoid suffering in somebody?
It could be. And as a disability studies professor, I can admit that there are conditions that are not only disabling but cause a lot of suffering. And there are situations, especially where a newborn may be born with some condition, knowing that the life expectancy was extremely short, and a question then about what is do we withhold treatment or not? So I think that there's I personally can understand some of that. I don't speak for the disability community, because I know some people that even what I just stated they wouldn't agree with, because there's been a long history of that devaluation, and that when you ask people who have significant or more complicated disabilities to judge their own life, they consistently judge it higher than other people view their life. Yeah. And so we always want to be very careful. But for me personally, I can see situations that suffering becomes too much. Really hard.
Yeah, and I think it becomes tricky from a medical standpoint. I know sort of part of your oath as a doctor is that you are going to do what benefits someone the most. So I think it definitely would become tricky in situations like that. I don't know, do you think there's a clear line, or is it more like a gray area?
I think clearly it's a gray area. We talk about in my intro class two court cases that happened in the 80s. One where a baby was born with a bunch of physical disabilities, and they thought that it would be better if they just allowed the baby to die. And so they withheld services, and the baby ended up living. And then another case where they refused to because the baby had significant disabilities, and they withheld, and then the baby died. And so the court cases were really trying to come up with who makes that decision. And they actually passed amendments in the 80s. Congress passed bills that said that we have to provide the supports and the medical interventions to the babies, regardless of, we're allowed to take a little bit into account what their life expectancy is, but that we have to provide those supports, and required, mandated by law. And that case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that that is unconstitutional, that the parents maintain that right to make that decision for their kids. And so that is my understanding of where we are at in terms of that very specific babies born with significant disabilities or health conditions that are the potential to cause enormous suffering and death. That it's the parents ultimately are the ones that decide whether to provide care or withhold care.
It sounded like in some cases, artificial selection could be seen as ethical, but if it was to become normalized, if there was widespread use, how would that affect our diversity? And that's the next question I asked John and kind of wanted to get into a little bit.
Well, clearly, if we are getting rid of certain genes that lead to certain conditions, we are becoming less diverse. I'm a big fan of diversity. I like all kinds of people, and this is going back to why autism is a tricky one with this. Right now, they haven't been able to identify a single gene that makes autism. It's related to a whole bunch of genes. There's an environmental. It's very, very, very complicated. But I would hate to see us get to a place where, okay, this one certain gene, these 7 genes are what creates autism. So let's just get rid of them. And I would hate to see that, because the autistic people bring a whole different way of living to the rest of us, and some of them might have more needs in certain areas and maybe aren't so good at X, Y, and Z, but they can be exceedingly good at, ABC or whatever it is. And that why would we want to take away that potential? And this is going more on a societal level, because at the fundamental level, I just think people should be allowed to live and live their life. And fundamentally, everything I think about is to the individual. But as a societal level, we appreciate people with autism have done great things and come up with great things for our communities. And I'm not saying, and this is why I keep hesitating here, that they don't have to. People with autism could just live and do nothing. That's perfectly fine. All of us have that opportunity we don't have to be, create new programs like software or whatever, change the world. Just living is good enough. But I get worried about that. If we're getting rid of autism, we may be getting rid of some of the greatest minds and new ways of seeing things. And that goes with the ADHD as well, attention deficit disorder. Some people with attention deficit disorder just have an amazing way of coming up with new solutions to problems, or creating art, or creating music, or whatever it is that kind of enriches all of us. So yeah, I would see, if we start removing these kind of things, a less diverse society, I think, is not as good of a society.
So in thinking about those effects on diversity, I wanted to dive deeper into some of the real life effects that have already been seen through this artificial selection, specifically with the prenatal testing for Down syndrome. We have already been able to prenatally test for Down syndrome for years, and this is making me wonder if that was kind of like a precursor to what we may see in the future with these new technologies and abilities through IVF and CRISPR.
Well, we've been able to identify for a long time now, prenatally, if someone has, pretty accurately, if someone's going to have Down syndrome. Long before this current technology on really looking down at the gene level and everything. But the chromosomal level, we've been able to see that. And it is very routine in our country and also in a lot of the more developed Western countries to do that screening. Pretty much any pregnant woman in America will be asked by their obstetrician if they want to have that screening done. And so it's something we've been doing for a long time. And the net effect of it, especially in the earlier days of doing this test, is that when parents found out that they had a fetus with Down syndrome, they would choose to abort it. And aborting of a fetus with Down syndrome was in the 90% in this country. And so it really meant that a lot less babies were being born with Down syndrome. Now, a lot of times people don't get the test, and so they don't know, and a lot of times the test isn't accurate. But for the 90+% of the parents who had the test that was positive, they chose to abort. And that brings me personally much sadness. I have many friends with Down syndrome, including my co-teacher, Justice, and their quality of life, the contributions that they bring to everybody, it's you know, they're fully part of all of us in our societies, in our schools, and everything. And so I'm saddened that so many parents choose that route. And so the implication has been that 90+% have been aborted and not even given the chance to try to make a life for themselves. Now, things have changed for lots of reasons: parent advocacy, general awareness, better supports. Because I want to say that when a parent gets that news that, oh, yeah, you're expecting baby has Down syndrome, there can be extra challenges to raising a child with Down syndrome. There are oftentimes medical needs that need to be addressed right away, surgeries and some big surgeries. There's also maybe lifetime supports that might be provided that they might need, not just related to health, but related to their, you know, their lives, how they live, where they live, who's, you know, helping them with their food and, you know, daily living and all that kinds of things. So there can be a resource cost, and I understand, you know, as a parent, you're trying to figure that out. Most parents who are trying to have a kid, they have those discussions. Is this economically feasible for me to have this child? How much is this going to cost? Can we provide the home and the environment that we want based on our needs? And so, you know, when they find out that they're having a child that might have more extensive needs, maybe the financial part and the lack of supports might tend them to decide not to carry on. But what we've seen over the last 20, 30 years is that there's been a lot of parent advocacy. We've seen a lot more kids with Down syndrome are being educated either within the general ed classroom or at least in their self-contained classrooms, but spend part of the day with the general student body. And so we're seeing way more awareness of people with Down syndrome. We're seeing them in our communities working at grocery stores and working at other places and stuff. And we're also providing better supports. And we have government programs and private programs that will help with some of the medical costs and some of the, you know, we have a special education law. It's free and appropriate public education for all students with disabilities. And so they can get a very quality education, everything. And we're seeing that the most current rates are somewhere around 60, in the 60% are still being aborted.
And yeah, that was another point I was kind of thinking about too, like economics. If like this technology of like artificial selection became more common, it probably would cost a lot of money. It would turn into more of like a class divide, like, I don't know, maybe being disabled could be seen more as like a sign of poverty or like a lower class sort of thing.
and the disability community is concerned about that. The disability community is always concerned about who has access to resources, and that's just typical or basic needs and going to the doctor for your regular visit. But in this situation, yeah, the people are worried that it's going to be the rich people who have access to this technology. They're going to change the genes. They're going to get rid of disabilities. They're going to choose eye color, hair color, height, all those kind of things, and that it's not going to be, everybody's not going to have the same access, and so you're going to see that like poverty and disability are going to become, even more related than it already is, and it's going to be probably create even worse stigma around disability than we already have.
Also, like kind of along with this, if like we were to, I don't know, try and get rid of disabilities before people are born, I don't know, what would that do for people who become disabled later in life? They're not everyone's born with a disability.
Right. And we probably would have less supports for those people because there'd be less of them, and so we would provide less for them. Disability right now is the largest minority. About 20% of the entire planet has a disability. And that is a huge driver and why we are making some progress. And in this country, we've made tremendous progress with accessibility. It's even in your generation, you just grew up with wheelchair ramps and buttons on doors and all that kind of stuff. You don't even think about it, but that was stuff that had to come, and so we're pretty good about building accessible environments and knowing how to do it because there's so many people. And so when you start limiting the people, then yeah, there's going to be less priority on it, less concern on it, and probably greater stigma because you're not going to kindergarten, with the kid with the disability and playing with them and learning from them. So yeah, I would be concerned about that.
Yeah, so I guess you think like things are going backwards as far as progress that has like been made?
For sure. For sure, without a doubt. I have been in this field for like 17 years teaching, and we were making progress. We were complaining the progress wasn't fast enough, but it was going in the right direction. And so we would say, well, we got to do this and this, and then we'd have to take a deep breath and go, well, at least we got this and this done, And so that had been the history all the way up until this year, where now it's not about just incremental change forward; it's trying to hold on to what we already have. Because I'm also worried about the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'm worried that might find its way to be modified and not a way that's really gonna really benefit as much as it does now people with disabilities. So yeah, I think there's a real concern that we're going back and we're just trying to hold the ground that we've gained.
Obviously there's a concern with that parents have, like wanting the best for their children, and like this genetic testing could have some good uses. What do you think could be maybe like a solution or a way to go around this?
Well, first and foremost, including the disabled voices in these decisions and as these policies get written, because we are actively writing policies now, trying to figure out what is the most ethical thing to do and try to codify it. And so these are things that we're doing right now. And so first and foremost, have the disabled voice represented in all of those discussions, just to make sure that they're being heard and that their concerns are being heard. So I think that's a huge one. I think that, like us in disability studies have to keep doing what we're doing on highlighting, the lived experience of disability and that, they can self-report a high quality of life. And they can contribute, and people with disabilities contribute in all ways, as professors and as astrophysicists, as in all parts of our society, we have people with disabilities that are doing stuff that's contributing, and so I think that we need to keep that message out there. We don't want people just thinking of disability as a horrendous, horrible thing that happens to people. And that's something we need to eradicate. We're up against a steep battle though, or hill, because the technology is going to move forward regardless. People will do what they want to do, and there are legitimate arguments for it. I think to a lot of people that the arguments for this kind of genetic manipulation is easy to understand at some level. Not the techniques, but the why people would do it. And that I think that there is genuineness, that people don't want to see other people suffer. And so if we can alleviate suffering before suffering even happens, I think that's a powerful argument for a lot of people.
After having this interview with Professor Schaefer, I felt like I gained a much better understanding of how artificial selection raises those concerns for the disability community. Individuals with disabilities contribute so much to society and really don't experience that low quality of life that people like to say that they do. It also does seem like there is a gray area on what is ethical when it comes to artificial selection and what is not. So I think it is a mostly risky territory in terms of ethics. And I think my biggest takeaway was just the message of needing to include the disability community in this decision and in policy making. I don't think able-bodied people should be the only ones making these laws around artificial selection. After listening to this episode, I hope you see disability differently or make efforts to advocate for the community, or even just think about how important diversity and inclusion is. As the slogan of the Disability Studies Department at NAU says, "Nothing about us without us." A big thank you to John Schaefer for the wonderful interview and insight. I highly recommend checking out some of his short films on disability at the link in the bio. And with that, tune in for our next episode coming soon.